Welcome to Grown Between Worlds, a podcast for adult children of immigrants and the people who love them. We're here to hold real conversations about identity, belonging, love, and life across cultures.
And we're committed to creating a space that feels grounding, honest, and human. Each conversation here touches on sensitive themes, which may feel deep or tender. We invite you to listen or watch at your own pace and take good care of yourself.
I'm Forouz.
And I'm Miranda. We're so glad you're on this journey with us.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Grown Between Worlds, a podcast by and for adult children of immigrants and the people who love them.
At its heart, this podcast is a place for the stories, identities, and lived experiences that don't always get seen or understood. Not fully, not deeply, and also not without a lot of explanation.
Here, we center the layered realities of women, queer and trans folks, neurodivergent and disabled people across immigrant communities, and the people in interethnic, intercultural, interfaith, interracial, and queer partnerships who are learning how to navigate love and life between worlds.
That means we'll be talking about things like identity, belonging, resilience, relationships, family dynamics, healing, and what it means to grow into yourself in ways your younger self might have never imagined.
This podcast isn't about trauma for the sake of trauma. It's about depth, insight, humor, honesty, and the freedom to take up space in the fullness of who you are.
We're so grateful you're here with us. And while we don't have everything figured out yet, we are deeply committed to creating a space that feels grounding, honest, and human. And if you've ever felt like you're living between cultures, between expectations, or between different versions of yourself, this space is for you.
If you're an adult child of immigrants, whether you immigrated as a child or teen or were born into a first or second generation immigrant family, this space is for you.
If you're a non immigrant partner who loves someone with an immigrant background and wants to understand them more deeply, you're also in the right place.
If you're a therapist, educator, coach, facilitator, or community worker supporting immigrant communities, you'll find nuance and stories here that might resonate with the people you serve.
And honestly, if you're just someone navigating identity, difference, belonging, or family across cultures and expectations, then welcome. So maybe we can start with how this podcast even came to be and how we ended up here sitting down with microphones.
Yeah, I feel like this podcast has been forming inside me for a long time, honestly, since childhood. My family and I immigrated to Canada from Iran when I was 9 years old. I'm the eldest child and the eldest daughter, and my brother was a toddler at the time. I picked up the language pretty quickly, and that meant that I was relied on a lot during the settlement process, whether it was translating, navigating systems, trying to make sense of all the newness and unfamiliarity, the culture shock and the homesickness, while still trying to figure myself out too as a preteen and soon afterwards as a teen. It was deeply overwhelming, and I felt like I had to do all of this new stuff all on my own. From a very young age, I could see how little support, understanding, and frankly, empathy there was for kids and teens who were immigrants, especially around what the experience does to you emotionally, mentally, and relationally, not just at the beginning of the settlement process, but for the rest of your life. That experience is a big part of why I went into psychology, then cultural anthropology, then social work, and why I became a therapist. It's why I primarily work with immigrants and children of immigrants, and particularly with women, queer and trans folks, neurodivergent people, and also people living with chronic illness and other disabilities. It's why this feels like such an important project to me, because the immigration experience doesn't just shape those first few years, it shapes us across an entire lifetime. And I believe this piece is really missing from all of the discourses around the impacts of immigration that already exist out there.
Yeah, my path into this is a bit different, but overlaps with yours in a lot of ways. I was born into a family that had already settled in Canada by the time I arrived. My family is from Guyana, and there is a pretty big age gap between me and my siblings. So I grew up in a mix of being held by a community, but still being unsure of where I fit in it, in Canadian spaces, in Guyanese spaces, and even in that hyphen between. There was a comfort, but also a type of loneliness, a sense of belonging, and then a sense of I don't fully belong anywhere sitting side by side.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot, actually. I think people assume that I would naturally feel more at home within Iranian or Iranian Canadian communities in the diaspora after we immigrated. But in reality, I didn't entirely fit in there. And I didn't fully fit in the so called like Canadian spaces either. We settled in Scarborough, a suburb of Toronto, Canada. Shout out to Scarborough, uh, where both Miranda and I kind of grew up, which is actually a very diverse, immigrant heavy part of the city. And even there, in this like incredibly multicultural context, I still spent a long time trying to figure out, where do I belong? What do I even call myself? Am I Iranian enough? Am I Canadian enough? Am I both? Am I neither? It took more than a decade after we had immigrated for me to start to feel any sense of clarity in that in between.
And I think that's the part that connects us. When I look back on my own friendships, and probably when you look back on yours as well, many of the people that we felt most drawn to are adult children of immigrants.
Yes. When I look at my closest friends and colleagues, most of them either immigrated as kids or teens, like myself, or they were born into immigrant families like you. Whether or not we actually talked explicitly about the immigrant experience, there was this unspoken understanding between us, like something in our bones that connected us.
It kind of sounds like we've been unintentionally trying to carve out a space where all of those in between experiences can exist together. And now with this podcast, we're doing it a bit more intentionally.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, we thought it'd be helpful to talk about some of the smaller, everyday moments of growing up between cultures. The ones that seem small on the surface, but overall shape you over time.
Moments like speaking one way at home and another way at school, or constantly translating not just language, but expectations and emotions, essentially code switching, if you will.
Or even at the grocery store, instinctively comparing prices, feeling your parents' voice in the back of your head telling you there's a cheaper version of that somewhere else.
Or learning cultural rules in one context that don't apply anywhere else. These little moments of cultural negotiation can be funny, confusing, grounding, or exhausting, and sometimes all of it at once.
And you know what? They're often the moments that help us recognize how deeply we've been shaped by living in between these different worlds.
Yeah. And I think for many of us, those small moments add up into a kind of muscle memory, a way of scanning every single room that we are in or we go into. What's expected here? What needs translating here? Who do I need to be in this space? Especially to be able to feel accepted or like a sense of belonging here.
For sure. So, as we move into the next part of this conversation, let's talk about what we're currently reflecting on the things we're drawn to, the things that inspire us, comfort us, or that are making us think.
For me lately, it's been listening to Iranian instrumental or pop music, especially when I need to sit down and focus on a task. For instance, my spouse and I go to local coffee shops with our laptops. And sometimes I can catch myself, or sometimes I can catch other people's glances, and suddenly I'm realizing, oh, I've actually been like quietly dancing in my chair to the music that I'm listening to while I'm typing on my laptop.
You can't deny the vibes. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And also for me, I think the ever comforting and like very nourishing sense and flavors of saffron, of cardamom, rosewater, pistachios, watermelon, and pomegranates. It's these sensory experiences that help me reconnect with my culture and homeland in an unspoken and embodied way that also feel deeply private, personal, and protected for me.
I love that. A little piece of home in all your senses.
Yeah.
And for me, on quite literally the other side of the world,
In Australia.
yeah, in Australia, down under, as some say. I'm deep in a geographic and cultural rabbit hole right now, navigating Australian culture, Canadian culture, trying to keep my own Guyanese culture alive. And that's been making me think a lot about movement, about my own movement and other people's, about belonging and the places that shape us overall.
Yeah, and of course, there's the occasional social media posts that sum up complex cultural experiences somehow in 12 seconds. And funny enough, it's usually my non immigrant spouse who finds them, saves them, and shows them to me one after the other, while we're kind of like sitting down on the couch at the end of the day trying to wind down for bed.
Honestly, those are sometimes more accurate than those academic articles. And I'm so sorry to all my professors.
Yeah, begrudgingly to my surprise, they really do manage to capture something. It's like these like little snapshots of what it feels like to live in the in between.
Yeah. All right. So instead of a traditional rapid fire, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to do a more reflective rapid fire. A few questions that let you get to know us a bit better and hopefully also make you think about your own answers.
Okay, so first question for you. What's a small fear that taught you something meaningful?
Hmm. Okay. A small fear that taught me something meaningful. You know, I might not have initially thought this, but I think my fear of spiders is teaching me to be a bit more mindful of all the insects I see and come across in Australia, especially because I'm not sure if they're poisonous. So I'm always looking at where I place my hands, where I rest my arms, especially on railings, like on stairs or just lookouts. Just generally more aware of my surroundings than I used to be, especially after like unknown bug flew into my forehead during one of our evening strolls. So I'm just hyper aware now.
Whoa, yeah. I mean, that's a very good point. You probably should be very, very careful out there in Australia. I mean, I only recently learned about the giant centipede of Australia, which apparently is venomous and dangerous. And I learned this from all the little souvenirs that I brought back for the kiddos in my life in Canada after we visited you in Australia.
Wait, what? I thought like silverfish were the biggest things I had to worry about, but thank you for telling me about this now, especially after you've left.
Yeah, you know, when we went to the Queensland Museum, I actually saw it there as well, but I didn't know that it was venomous until after we came. And I was like picking this one out for one of the little kiddos in our lives. And then I looked it up because I wanted to have like a little tidbit or like a fun fact to share with them when I gave them the gift. And then I was like, oh, okay. Well, good thing we didn't come across that while we
Yeah, I'm really glad that you didn't see it, and I hope I never see it either.
I hope so too for your sake.
Yeah. But what about you?
Well, for me, I'm actually really, really afraid of heights and have been since I was very young. But interestingly, it's something I've spent a long time gently working through. Almost like my own form of exposure therapy, but not formally. So this is not a I recommend that you do this at home. It's not. At one point, I actually worked at the CN Tower in Toronto, and I know you did as well, Miranda. And for me, going up the elevators all the time, I could never actually bring myself to look down while we were going up in the elevators. I had a really hard time stepping onto the glass floor. And I just kept trying to like challenge myself to at least look at the windows and like look across the horizon and try to like enjoy the views. And one of the nights when I was closing up, I had the shift that I was on. I was taking people up and down to the very tip, at the very top observation deck, and it was a summer night. It was clear skies, full moon, and I just sat there for 5 minutes and watched this beautiful full moon kind of glowing downtown Toronto, especially over the lake. And I realized that by avoiding all of these different experiences that kind of activated my fear of heights, I was also depriving myself of these like really beautiful things that I could witness. And then later on, like much later on, I actually went skydiving. I did some zip lining, and all still, it's also felt kind of within my own safe limits. I was stretching myself, but I wasn't kind of tearing and breaking myself. And because they were like professionals and harnesses, I felt like, okay, this is boundaried. I can trust this. And so it felt like a safer way for me to meet this fear.
For sure. And two things on that. There is something about being at the top of the observation deck in the nighttime, watching the city lights sparkle and then the lake water kind of do the same thing to the city lights. It's magical. This
Yeah.
is not sponsored by the CN Tower. This is not a plug, but it's definitely a sight to behold if you've never witnessed it yourself, especially you and I both working there. We might have taken it for granted, but you speaking about it just reminded me, and I got goosebumps all over my body because I loved that view. I
Yeah.
rarely worked the evening shift, but when I did, it was really a treat. And also, can we just quickly touch back on the fact that you're afraid of heights, but you jumped out of a moving plane?
Yeah, yeah, I did. It was on my 30th birthday, and I didn't even tell my parents.
Oh
I
my gosh.
assumed that as immigrant parents, they would like forbid me from doing it. I ended up going with my three best friends from high school, and um, later on, when we got together for a birthday dinner, I showed my parents the video of me kind of like jumping out of the plane and landing.
Oh my god.
Um, and to my surprise, they were actually both really excited to try it themselves. And since then, both of them have actually gone skydiving as well. Over the age of 60, which I was like, all right, I did it at 30, did it over the age of 60. They must be much cooler than me.
You're never too young to go skydiving.
I guess so, yeah. Um, but on the way up in the plane that kind of like takes you to the right altitude before you have to do the jump, it's about 10-15 minutes or so before you get up there. And the entire time I was doing like mindful breathing, like self affirmations, prayer, just to kind of like calm myself down. But then when we had to actually like shimmy over to the edge and get ready to jump, I completely froze sitting on the edge of that plane. And I'm pretty sure if the instructor hadn't like moved us forward, I would still be sitting up there on that plane.
You'd still be up there. That's quite a feat, and I love that story of you working at the CN Tower to gradually, I guess, being pushed out of a plane, but willingly. I
Yes,
haven't
I technically consented to it.
yeah, and I'm glad that it was a great, adventure for you. I've done bungee jumping, which scared me in ways that I was not prepared for, but never skydiving. It's definitely on the list, but, we'll see if I ever check that box off.
Yeah. I've actually always worried about doing bungee jumping because of that like bounce back or reverberation. I was always so worried that it would make me too nauseous. How was it for you?
Oh my gosh, listen, I thought I was invincible because I had been on roller coasters, so I thought I would be okay with that reverberation, but the backwards pull made me wanna throw up every single thing I've ever eaten
Ugh.
in my life. And I also bungee jumped over a quarry that was full of water, so as I was bungee jumping down, I was getting closer to the water, and I closed my eyes, and then I got dunked into it, and I didn't know when to open my eyes because I was just so lost in all of those sensations, and I didn't know which way was up and down. It
Wow,
was
yeah.
yeah.
That would totally freak me out. Yeah. I mean, I think what this like small fear has taught me at least, or I guess it's actually not technically a small fear of mine, it's a big fear of mine, is that it is important to push myself outside of my comfort zone and to put myself in safe enough situations where I can stretch but not like tear and meet my fears. But still, again, like I said, like within my own limits, there's something really powerful in learning that we can do that, that we can kind of push ourselves to the edge of our limits and stretch.
Yeah, we don't know what we're capable of, right?
Yeah.
Okay, second question. What is a belief from childhood that you had to unlearn?
Oh, okay. I have one that's both funny and kind of illustrates how easily misunderstandings can settle in when we don't talk about things openly, especially at a young age. So, when my mom told me that she was pregnant with my younger brother, there's a 7-year age gap between us. So, I was about 6 at the time when this conversation happened. I was very shocked, and I was also very angry, and I was very demanding for the exact information on how this could have ever happened to us. And I kept insisting, and I was like, "How could this happen? How could you let this happen? What did you do? Why?" And for a moment, I guess she really did not wanna have, like, the sex talk with me at the age of 6, and I don't in my memory, I'm not even sure if other people were around. I think maybe my dad and maybe one of my grandparents was there as well, I'm not sure. But she just was like she just was, like, trying to search for the right answer, especially with how demanding I was being, and then finally she said, "I took a pill," and much later on, I learned that she was doing that for fertility, but I didn't know that or understand that at all at the time. So, from the age of 6 until I was about 12 or 13 years old, I believed that if you took any kind of a pill, including vitamins, like Flintstone vitamins that were very big back then, you would get pregnant. So
Oh my
I
gosh.
refused to take any medication, even when I was sick, because I was absolutely terrified. Then finally, in like sex health classes in about, I think, grade 7 or so, after we had immigrated to Canada, I had this moment of realizing, like, oh, wait, I've been living in terror of getting pregnant for years for no reason from Flintstone vitamins.
The revelation that you must have felt when you realized that you could have been taking the Flintstone vitamins and also, like, maybe cold medicine when you weren't feeling well the whole time.
Yeah, right? And I think for me, especially, it was especially confusing because I also live with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So when I kind of started menstruating at 11, it was extremely irregular. I would go 7, 8, 9 months without a period. So there was this added layer of confusion for me of what does this mean? What's happening to me? If it's been 6 or more months, then I must be pregnant, right? And I share that because it speaks to how easily young minds can make certain associations or assumptions or conclusions when we're missing information, and how long those beliefs can linger and stay with us. What about you?
I think something I had to unlearn. My first thought is a memory from when I was visiting Guyana when I was about 4 years old. And actually, similar to yourself, there's a big age gap between me and my siblings. And my older sister, who's 10 years older, was giving me a shower. And we're in Guyana, so the showers are located outside at the time. Um, and I saw something moving in the drain. And I'm staring at it. I'm staring at some dark movement in the drain. And then a frog pops up and I screamed. And for years, I don't know why, but I like that seeing that frog jump out of the drain just made me believe that frogs lived in shower drains. Like, in my mind, that's where they came from. That was their home. They hung out there. They they did all their shenanigans. And then, you go through life, you come back from Guyana from the family trip, you go to class, you go to biology class, and you're learning about tadpoles. And then I was like, "Oh, that's where frogs come from, not the shower drain." But, it stuck with me for a really long time.
Oh my gosh, you must have been terrified of showering or washing your hands for years.
For some reason, I was fine with, like, sink drains. It was just the shower drain that housed the frogs, and, like, that just goes to speak on kid logic because it makes no sense.
But these associations we make as children can be so impactful, right? And if no one talks to us about it, and talks us through it, and if it's dismissed or if it's not corrected gently, then they stay with us for a long time. And sometimes they shape how we actually move through the world.
Yeah, and, even if they might be small or silly, you never know what else they're connected to or what they might even represent.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, I'm curious. What's a life decision that you felt uncertain at the time, but ultimately aligned with who you're becoming?
That was a very good question. Honestly, I would say this podcast. I think Grown Between Worlds began forming in me when I first immigrated to Canada with my parents and my younger brother. Even as a child immigrant, I could see the gaps in the understanding and support both within immigrant communities and the larger Canadian society. It felt like it I felt the loss and grief of displacement, that no one else really seemed to notice or understand or care about. I felt the loneliness of not being able to fit myself neatly into any category or group or community, and it all really shaped my choices in particularly education and my career. Um, when I look back, I realize I was really in search of answers and clarity, hoping that the pieces would eventually fall into place and I could finally experience a sense of healing and peace. But even with all of that, starting this podcast still felt really uncertain because it's vulnerable, it's so public,
For sure.
and it's inviting people into something that's very, very close to my heart and to the heart of others. And at the same time, it feels deeply aligned. It feels like an extension of what I've been trying to do in quieter ways in my studies and in my work for many, many years.
And I I just wanna say thank you for asking me to be part of this. Like, I know our experiences are a bit different. I was born in Canada, whereas you immigrated as a child, but there's still a lot of overlap in what we've carried and how we've navigated through our own identities, family, as well as belonging. I know there were times when being born into an immigrant family in Canada felt grounding and times where it felt really isolating. And I often didn't know where I fit in either communities because I wasn't really fully Canadian, but I also really wasn't fully Guyanese. So, in what space was I to coexist? But working
Mhm.
on this project, it kind of feels like a way of honoring the deeper shared experiences we have with other adult children of immigrants. Essentially, to create a space we've both needed and that we know that many others need too.
Yeah, and thank you for accepting the invitation. I love having you along for this journey. And whether we talk about immigration directly or not, we have something in common with our friends who are adult children of immigrants, something that lives in our bones, maybe even in our epigenetics at this point. And now we're here intentionally creating a space that reflects the lived reality. We also want to take a moment to speak to why this podcast feels especially important right now. We're releasing it in a moment where conversations about identity, culture, belonging, and safety are more important than ever. Over the past decade, we've seen a global rise in xenophobia and anti immigrant rhetoric from North America, Europe, and the UK to Australia, and even parts of South Asia and Southwestern Asia, often referred, often referred to as the Middle East. Harsh immigration policies, border violence, and political narratives that dehumanize migrants have become more common, and that impacts real people, real families, and real lives.
We're also living in a time where queer and trans communities, especially trans women, gender diverse people, and queer youth, are facing escalating prejudice and legislative attacks. We're seeing pushes against feminism, against bodily autonomy, against gender equality. We're seeing increasing hostility towards neurodivergent and disabled people whose needs and experiences are regularly dismissed and or misunderstood.
And yet, in the midst of all of this, immigrant communities and women, queer and trans people, neurodivergent disabled people, they all continue to demonstrate extraordinary resilience and creativity and compassion and wisdom. And people in interethnic, intercultural, interfaith, interracial, and queer partnerships model a kind of courage that shows us what's possible when we choose curiosity over fear, love over rigidity, and openness over inherited scripts.
Yeah, these communities teach us about connection, about holding multiple truths at once, about navigating differences with tenderness, about what diversity makes possible in a world that desperately needs more empathy.
This is why this podcast matters because these stories, these voices, this wisdom, they're antidotes to the rising tides of fear and division.
So, practically speaking, what can you expect from Grown Between Worlds? Each episode will be a reflective conversation with someone who has lived experience of immigration or close ties to immigrant communities, such as an adult child of immigrants or a non immigrant partner or someone who works closely with immigrant communities.
We approach each conversation with curiosity and deep respect. We don't ask anyone to overshare. We don't push for trauma or sensationalized narratives. Instead, we create spacious, thoughtful conversations that honor people's boundaries, contexts, and complexities.
That means that some guests might join us anonymously or with pseudonyms, and that's absolutely welcomed here. We ask every guest two grounding questions, one at the beginning of the episode about their personal connection to immigration, and the latter at the end of the episode about what wisdom they'd offer to others navigating life between worlds.
Mhm. And our hope is that as you listen or watch, you'll feel less alone, that you'll hear parts of your own story reflected back to you. Maybe find new language for experiences you've been carrying quietly, or discover a completely new or intriguing perspective. Each conversation will touch on sensitive themes, which may feel deep or tender for you. So, we invite you to listen and to watch each episode at your own pace and always take good care of yourself throughout.
So, what we're really trying to say is what you can expect from this podcast is a space where you don't need to have everything figured out.
A space for anyone navigating life between cultures, between identities, between stages of life, between selves, with gentleness, curiosity, and honesty.
I'm really excited to get started with this.
Yeah, me too.
New episodes will be released weekly, and we look forward to growing this community with you.
Thank you so much for spending this first episode with us. We're grateful to share this journey with you. Please follow or subscribe to our podcast, share it with people who might resonate, join our newsletter for more info and resources, leave us a comment if you'd like, and join us again for the next episode.
And remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Thanks again for listening or watching this episode of Grown Between Worlds. We're grateful to share this space and community with you.
Please follow or subscribe to our podcast, share it with people who might resonate, join our newsletter for more info and resources, leave us a comment if you'd like, and join us again for future episodes. And remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Grown Between Worlds is sponsored by Forouz Salari Online Counseling and Consulting.